Hello and welcome to Good Evening Britain, a Force for Good's weekly show coming to you live from our studios here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConnachie. We're broadcasting across all our digital platforms throughout the United Kingdom and across the world, bringing you quality pro-UK comment and analysis every Wednesday from 7 until 8 p.m. And welcome, folks. Please send in your greetings. Please tell us where you're coming from. Please send in your comments and please send in your questions. And the good news is we've got a great guest coming on at the bottom of the hour. Coming on at 7:30 is the one and only David Scott of the UK column from ukcolumn.org. And good evening to everybody coming in on Facebook. Debbie was first in this evening. Good to see you as always, Debbie. And Robert, glad to hear from you. Also, good evening to you. And to Christopher, says good evening, fellow Unionists, as does TC everywhere around the world. Unionists, pro-UK and the British and pro-British community around the world. And we know there are tens of millions of them, right? So, great guest this evening, David Scott from the one and only UK column. He's definitely worth listening to. We're going to talk to him tonight about his thoughts on GBNews, his thoughts on Mark Steyn, his thoughts on Mark Steyn no longer speaking for GBNews, and the importance thereby of independent media, such as his organisation UK Column, and also organisations like A Force for Good, bringing you quality pro-UK comment and analysis, and thankfully beholden to no one other than, of course, the lords of big tech, who can zap us all at a button. And that's why it's so important to stay in touch with us and sign up, as that scroller going along the bottom of the screen says. Go to aforceforgood.uk/sign-up and give us your name and email so that we'll always be in touch with you, regardless of what the titans of big tech try to do or try to censor us in whatever way. We'll have a direct way of contacting you. That's why the sign up button there is so important. Please, folks, take advantage of it if you haven't already. Nice to hear from Becky from a wet and windy Dundee. Well, Dundee was in the news today because Hamza Yousafs and his wife have dropped a case that they had against the local nursery, and this has been going on for about 2 years. They applied to have their child there and they got turned down, so wrongly suspecting there was some kind of discrimination involved. What they then did, can you believe this, is they made several false applications under quote-unquote Scottish sounding names to see if those sorts of children would be accepted. And I don't know what they imagine a Scottish sounding name is. Perhaps something like, I don't know, Jock McTavish, or Hamish McScotland, or even Alistair McConnachie. I don't know if they used that name. Wouldn't surprise me if they did. However, I don't know what exactly was the upshot of their little trick experimentation, but they were going to sue the nursery for anti-Yousafism. That's what they were going to sue the nursery for. But they've dropped the case, thankfully, and the person behind the nursery had a quote that's worth reading out again, if only just to stick it to the Yousafs. And this person said, quote, "Despite this vindication, it has been deeply upsetting to have spent almost 18 months and tens of thousands of pounds defending our small nursery against their false claims. It beggars belief that rather than pick up the phone to quickly resolve what was a simple misunderstanding, they colluded in a half-baked sting operation and then mounted a vicious and cynical campaign against us in the national media. What sort of people do that exactly? What sort of people do that? Now, of course, what they should be saying is, sorry for your inconvenience, sorry for accusing you of anti-Yousafism, but something tells us that's not quite their style. And what I also discovered today is that Mrs. Yousafs, would you believe it, is a councillor in Dundee City Council. What a family. What a family. Anyway, that was some good news just to open the programme with. Elaine Thompson says she's just signed up. Brilliant stuff, Elaine. Thank you. Elizabeth says the nursery should counter-sue them. It's a good point. It's a good point. I don't know if they will or not, but it's a crazy story. Christopher says the endless comedy that is Humza and the SNP. Think there is a communications offence too in there somewhere. Yeah, a good point. Masquerading as a child that you're not. We don't have the Humza scooter video to immediately play you there, but that's always worth revisiting at times like this, when he was scooting down the hallway of Holyrood with a poor secretary literally running after him, and he came a cropper. Always more entertainment. Alan says Humza is an embarrassment to this country. And Stuart goes, SNP people, aren't they something else? Well, Christopher's saying that the nursery should bring a civil action against them also. And Stuart says something that we all think is totally incredible, that these people try to run this country. It is. And you're like, this woman as well is a councillor for Dundee City Council, what a world, what a country. Okay, well, some more good news as well. There was a very successful rally which was held on Sunday, which I myself went along to take photographs and to show general support. And it was run by a lady called Kelly J. Keane, and she had titled it Let Women Speak. And it was essentially mainly to bring together dissenting voices against the SNP and Green parties gender recognition reform bill, and to basically stick it to Sturgeon and to make it clear that people didn't like what was going on. And there was a healthy turnout of people, I have to say. We've got a photograph that we'll just bring up of, that's the crowd there. That's me actually standing on the side. I clambered onto the side of the Queen Victoria monument. That's Prince Albert there in his horse in the background. And as soon as I clambered up there and took that photograph, this policewoman come up and told me to come down. But so as soon as I came down, somebody else clambered up, and she never told him to come down. Anyway, there was a drone in the sky, so they were watching. They probably said, that's Alistair McConnachie climbing up there onto the Victoria statue. Make sure you take him down. Anyway, I managed to at least get that photograph of a healthy turnout of people. And there was Sturgeon's fanboys basically were at the other end of the square, and they were creating a little bit of a racket. But in there, in the midst, you can't actually see Kelly J. Keane, but the speaker system there was on the right, and it lasted for 2.5 hours, and some interesting posters that were there. I took some photographs here. The next one is, there we go, Nicola Sturgeon, destroyer of women's rights, and that was very much a theme of the day, along with the idea, and which is 100% correct as well, that she is imperiling young, vulnerable children as well, who may be confused. That photograph, there are no males in female jails. Well, that's certainly something that has been very much on the agenda, and which may be the reason that Sturgeon comes crashing down, really, because of the story of the rapist who was sent as a matter of course to a women's jail simply because he said that he identified as one for the purposes of that. Okay. Sturgeon, destroyer of women's rights. That was a very prominent slogan there, and this was an issue that a lot of people were concerned about. Children are not lab rats. Stop the madness of transmutilation and sterilisation. And quite a few people on the microphone were addressing that as well. Those flags in the background there, if just go back to that last one, those flags in the background, the purple, white and green, that's the suffragette flag, which is being used by a lot of the women who are saying that the women's rights that have developed over the last century are being turned on their head by Sturgeon and the Green Party, which is in fact what is indeed happening. Okay, there you go. It's time to resign. Resign, Sturgeon says. That pithy slogan, that's a good one. That could be made to a much bigger poster, actually. Thank you for the person who sent that one in. Okay. The SNP are failing Scotland. That's thanks also to the person that sent that one in to us. A picture there of John Swinney, Nicola Sturgeon, and Humza Yousaf, who looks like he is about to write a letter pretending to be a white person and sending it to a nursery to see if they'll admit him. He's got that look as if that's what he's up to right there. But that's his kind of perpetual look, isn't it? Okay. And that was perhaps my favourite flag for some reason there. SNP out, which is a very colourful flag. And nice to see, because at the end of the day, the answer is going to be political, isn't it? Okay. And there's another shot of that. So some of those photos taken by myself, some sent in to us. Thanks for the people who sent them in. Sturgeon, destroyer of an entire nation, says Alan Dawes. And Frankie says she's a traitor dictator who is totally sick in the head, for good measure. Becky Young says Kelly J is amazing. Well, she certainly is impressive. There's no question about it. And it just shows the importance of somebody who says, right, I'm going to do something about this, and who is articulate and is able to get things organised. And well done for her. She does this. She just goes around big towns and cities and just sets up her microphone and invites people to speak and lets the cards fall where they may. William says that he was there with his son in attendance. That's good to know, William. I didn't spot you, but next time we'll say hello. They could be hanging on by a string. We're going to be talking about that with our guest coming up at the bottom of the hour at 7:30, David Scott, who was also at that event. So I'm going to be asking him what his thoughts were on it, and if he thinks that it may mark the end of Sturgeon. But she does have a capacity, of course, as we all know, to weather the storm. I'm just reading an article here, a sketch by Madeline Grant from the Telegraph, basically saying, despite what Sturgeon's been subjecting us to, the perpetual circus cavalcade that is the SNP rolls on, but with perhaps a little less momentum. And Alan Cochrane notes that the best that can be said about Sturgeon's leadership is that it is difficult to spot an alternative. Neither John Swinney, who's been the leader before, nor Keith Brown have much support, and Kate Forbes, the finance minister, is still to come back after maternity leave, but it's hard to see her relishing the top job in a party and government. Well, forget the government bit, but certainly from a party and administration that's lost its way. The fact that there's nobody else is a poor excuse for keeping a bad leader in post. And that message may finally have got through to the Scottish nationalists. One or two comments there coming in from TikTok. Somebody says that I look like Glenn Michael. He's a cartoon. Well, I do remember Glenn Michael's Cavalcade. And I remember him because when I was a little boy, when we came back from Libya, we didn't have a television. And this would be 1973. And I got put into primary 3 at Homeston Primary in Ayr. And for some reason, the teacher decided to ask everybody their favourite television programme. And I was like the wee poor boy that didn't have a telly, but I couldn't let on. And so it started at the back of the class. And people were saying Glenn Michael's... What they were saying was Glenn Michael's Cavalcade. Right? What on earth is that when you're like a wee 9-year-old or 8-year-old boy? Glenn Michael's Cavalcade. And I couldn't pick it up. And I'm thinking it's Glenn something. So it came round to me. Everybody's favourite programme was Glenn Michael's Cavalcade. And it comes to me, Alistair, what's your favourite programme? And I goes, Glenn Mitchell's Cattle Cave. And the whole class burst out laughing at me. Whole class. And the teacher goes, Alistair, it's Glenn Michael's Cavalcade. I was like, yes. Oh, I'm still living that down all these years later. Anyway, so I never watched Glenn Mitchell's Cattle Cave as a consequence of that ever. But that's whenever you see that name, that's what I'm reminded of. Anyway, chap there says, hello from Ulster. Hello back. MC says, good old Glenn. I'm sure he was a famous Scottish personality, perhaps the only Scottish television personality of that decade. Yes, indeed. Now, something I just want to bring up before we get to our next part of the show is, I just want to put this out there. Let's bring up the SNP spend on social media advertising. This is going to blow your mind. Discovered this today. And it was some material that I was researching as a consequence of having discovered this. Okay, just take that down for a second. Having discovered this, SNP criticised for 630,000 propaganda website. Okay, this appeared on the 1st of February in the Daily Telegraph. And I've literally never heard anything about this. And I researched it on the internet. I couldn't find anything at all. This is the only place where it appears. They spent £630,000 on a website, which has got probably less readers in it than anything else. But put up that thing again. There you go. That's 4.5 years of social media adverts from the SNP on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Pinterest, Reddit, Snapchat, TikTok, Twitter and YouTube, coming to the princely sum of almost £11.5 million. Look at in April 21 to March 22, they spent almost £1 million on advertising in 1 year on YouTube, almost £1 million on Twitter. Almost 2.5 million on Facebook in April 21 to 22. Unbelievable. These are incredible sums. And I know what they'll say is they'll justify it and they'll say, oh, that's Scottish government messaging to keep people in the loop on whatever. Yeah, but as we know, there's a very fine line between Scottish government so-called messaging and adverts for Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP. Goodness me, these government so-called messages are almost always delivered by Nicola Sturgeon or some SNP twerp. And that's taxpayer money, by the way. That's not the party's money, that's taxpayer money. Almost 11.5 million in that 4.5 year period on all of these channels. Okay. Can you imagine? You imagine what we could do with 11.5 million advertising A Force for Good, our books, our stuff. 11.5 million to advertise a wee book for the Union. Now that's what I'm talking about. That would be good. That would be money very well spent. Okay, before our guest at the bottom of the hour, I'm going to talk about on this day in British history, because it's a very notable day in Scottish and British history. And if I said to you, in my end is my beginning, do you know who said those immortal words, in the end is my beginning? It was not Mel Gibson in Braveheart. It was actually a real person. It was Mary, Queen of Scots, who on this day, 8th of February in 1587, unfortunately got her head chopped off as a consequence of Elizabeth I finally getting rid of her troublesome cousin. And she got her head cut off at Fotheringay Castle, which is just outside Oundle in Northamptonshire. And she was born in Linlithgow Palace, and she was brought up in France in order to avoid what was called the rough wooing, which was an attempt by Henry VIII to force a marriage between her and his son Edward. And when Mary the First of England passed away, she was a daughter of Henry VIII. When she passed away, the crown passed to her half-sister Elizabeth, and this is where the controversy came in, that because Elizabeth was the daughter of Anne Boleyn had also got her head chopped off, and the marriage was annulled, and so quite a few people in England did not consider Elizabeth I to be legitimate, because she was the daughter of a marriage which had been annulled. So back in those days, there was a question over whether or not Elizabeth I was the rightful Queen of England, and Mary, Queen of Scots, believed herself to be the rightful Queen of England, because Mary herself was descended from the Tudors also. And so this, many English Catholics as well especially, didn't believe that Elizabeth I was the rightful Queen of England. So Elizabeth, while a powerful enough individual, was always a little bit destabilised, as it were, by Mary, Queen of Scots' constant claim to the throne. So basically, she solved that problem by entrapping Elizabeth in a castle in England for 18.5 years. And finally what happened was Mary, Queen of Scots, got accused of being implicit in something called the Babington Plot, which allegedly was a plot to assassinate Elizabeth I. And whether or not she was complicit in that, that was a good enough excuse for Elizabeth I to chop Mary's head off and get rid of the problem that way. What we can say, though, from a British perspective, is that in the fullness of time, it was Mary, Queen of Scots' son who, in fact, would take the throne of England in the Union of the Crowns at 1603. So in the fullness of time, the Scots did lay their claim and did take the English throne. And we've got a picture of Elizabeth and Mary, which I'll just put up, and that's part of, looks like a tapestry, and unfortunately it's not a proper photograph because there's a bit of it missing at the end there. But it says, Mary Regina, remember that the theatre of the world is wider than the realm of England. Interesting. And then in the bottom right there, in my end is my beginning. And the actual quote that's sewn into the bottom below that is alleged to be from Robert the Bruce. But that's quite a nice photograph. And I like the next picture that we've got there, which I find to be quite charming. That's Mary Queen of Scots with a little James VI. And we're doing a magazine this year to celebrate the 420th anniversary of the Union of the Crowns, and we're going to use that photograph in there of a mini James VI. And of course, he when his mother abdicated the Scottish throne, he was left as the king at an extremely young age. And so for the first 13 years of his life, Scotland was actually run by regents who spent their time basically killing and poisoning each other to try to see who would be the top dog ultimately, until James himself took the throne. I've been spending a couple of weeks just researching that period in greater depth, and one of the things that really comes out strongly is the extent to which, when James took the throne, the whole question of the word Britain actually became a big issue, because while he then became the king of both realms and called himself King of Great Britain, he also wanted a political union, and one of the things for that would be to change the name of England and Scotland and just simply call it Britain. And this was actually a big debate, and I've got here Francis Bacon actually looked at the pros and cons of that, and actually addressed the House of Commons on this very question. And this is like back in 1604, okay? So the idea was really coming into vogue of this new political construct that nobody's ever been thinking about, called Britain. And we published a new article yesterday called A Plan for Amity and Equity, which was a document related to another scholar of 1604 who had been advocating the same thing, and you'll find the link to that up in the thread. Very grateful to a reader of our Facebook site who sent me the following information last week as well, saying that back in April 1567, so that would be 6 years before the Union of the Crowns, and indeed while Mary was still imprisoned, she signed herself off as Mary Regina, by the grace of God, Queen of Great Britain, France and Ireland, and Protector of the Faith. Gives greetings to all good men throughout her land, both clergy and laity. So again, the thing here is the Scottish Queen wanting to become Queen of Great Britain, and indeed seeing herself as such. And that's an important point that we'll bring out in our magazine, which we're going to publish in March, the extent to which Mary Queen of Scots was again looking to claim the throne of all of the British Isles. Good. Well, I see our guest David Scott is in the room. I'm just going to bring in David. Great to have him. Folks, please send in any questions that you've got for David from the UK column. Hello, David.
Hello, Alistair. Delighted to be with you tonight. How are you?
Very well, very well. Thank you very much for coming on to the show. Really looking forward to speaking to you and to introducing you as well to our audience. And for those who perhaps have not heard of ukcolumn.org, it's been running now for several years, and you are would you call yourself the Scottish correspondent for UK Column?
Yeah, well, that's at least how it started. I operate under kind of a Northern Exposure banner, which is the journalistic output that comes out of Scotland to the UK column, and also talk about everything to do with our culture. Our culture is in terms of what's happening in Britain, the wider Anglo-Saxon world, and the wider world beyond that as well. So it covers a whole host of subjects:
Yes.
defence, culture, religion, all sorts of things. But specifically concentrate on a lot of Scottish issues and the particular subset of the culture wars that are currently raging north of the border.
Well, absolutely. And I was watching the UK column this morning as well, and what a professional outfit that you guys run down there. I know you've been doing it for several years, but it's as smooth as anything that you see on the telly, as they say. And the amount of work that must go into preparing each programme as well is really quite remarkable. And I think it's great that you're there, because I thought I'd maybe just bring up this to you, because on the social media in the last couple of days, there's been a wee bit of controversy around about GBNews and how perhaps their star performer, Mark Stein, is no longer working for them because he appears to have been asked to be prepared to foot the bill personally for any Ofcom fines that might be levied against the channel for them talking about things that they're not meant to talk about in modern Britain. Do you have any thoughts on that vis-a-vis the Power of UK column to stand against that kind of thing?
Well, it's very interesting how this has gone down. I mean, obviously, we've watched GBNews come into the fray, and obviously, there's it's a well-funded, large organisation compared to the UK column, which operates on a much smaller budget. They made the decision to be regulated. Right, so they essentially chose a particular business model that required, and indeed made a virtue of we're Ofcom regulated. You can trust us because the government says you can trust us.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so there's a false faith inherent in that, and like all false faiths, it eventually bites you in the bum. So here you got Mark Stein, and Mark Stein's been outstanding in that he's talked more than anyone else in GBNews about vaccine injury. And there are certain things you can't talk about. We've got banned, UK column got thrown off of YouTube. Just 1,000 short of 100,000 subscribers. We're just about to get the little plaque for the wall. And at that point, YouTube was quite important to us.
Yes.
And we were thrown off. We were thrown off for talking about vaccine injury. And it was quite an interesting series of events, because a woman came to us with her story, which was entirely genuine and entirely accurate and had no guile in it at all. It was her story, and of how her husband had been vaccinated, and then via Guillain-Barré syndrome had become paralysed, hospitalised, and the battle she had to get it recognised, to get it appropriately treated, and then recognised as vaccine damage. And obviously the crisis this brought to her and her family and her husband, and the horrible situation it placed them in. Uh-huh. And it was an important story, but it wasn't a story you were allowed to tell. So we told it. We got an audio interview. Brian Gerrish did an audio interview with the lady, and we put this out, and nothing happened. We put it out, everything was fine. Then Conservative Woman, which is a good magazine, is doing good work.
Yeah.
They picked it up. They transcribed word for word our interview and put it out as an article. Now, of course, Conservative Woman's read by people who don't necessarily watch the UK column.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would speculate people in Conservative Party HQ probably keep an eye on what Conservative Women are saying. So when that happened, within 24 hours we were thrown off of YouTube. over that video, over
Crikey.
that particular report, and were never to be allowed back. In fact, Mike Robinson, our editor, um, all of his various accounts on YouTube, all of them were banned. Anything with Mike Robinson's name on it was expunged from YouTube. So you're not allowed to talk about vaccine damage. You're not allowed to talk about what the government policy has actually done. I was personally thrown off Twitter for tweeting accurate government statistics regarding vaccine harm.
Yes.
You can't do this. So in GBNews, Mark Stein, he was the most gallant talking about this. And if you view GBNews as kind of mainstream, or at least mostly mainstream, certainly of the regulated news channels, he was probably, on this side of the Atlantic, the strongest voice speaking about vaccine damage.
Oh, undoubtedly. Without him, he was just something else on all of those sorts of matters, and there was so many people watching him and really, really appreciating his content, and such an entertaining individual as well, who was able to put out very serious stuff in a way that was palatable, because it was, it made you laugh, if only with despair.
He was entertaining, he was watchable, but he was courageous. So he's now under investigation, or his content, his output is under investigation, and it appears that, shall we say, he didn't feel that he was being supported by the senior management within the organisation. Of course, if you've got an organisation and the first thing you say is you say to Ofcom, you set our policies, we will bend to meet your will, then you're immediately in a very difficult position, because who are these people?
Oh, absolutely, and who knows? Literally, who knows who they are?
Most of them are ex-BBC. So the first question we've got for them is, okay, of the people on the Ofcom board who are making all these decisions, how many are receiving BBC pensions? Right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't know, but we think quite a few. How many have got a financial interest in the BBC, which means a financial interest in the establishment narrative, which means a financial interest in not rocking the boat? Let alone their background. Right? Their background of being in the establishment is not going to generate, shall we say, courageous, outspoken, speaking truth to power. Right? I mean, that's not what that background and training would create. But you've got financial interests as well that push against it. So you have to be in a position where you're maintaining your ability to speak, your freedom to speak. And therefore I look at what GBNews. Now GBNews have got other problems today, because they've obviously annoyed a lot of people. They've been attacked over anti-Semitism. As far as I can see, entirely spurious claims of anti-Semitism that amounts to nothing more than a smear.
Yes.
Right? So they've said something that someone hasn't liked, and they're now being smeared with that label, because that label's toxic. And if that can be made to stick, then people will be no platforms, people will be untouchable, people will become the tar babies of the media world and beyond the pale. And we've seen over and over again, both sides of the Atlantic, intelligent voices, thoughtful voices, creative voices, funny, engaging people who are not this sort of phrase you would get, spewing hatred, right? Who are not generating hate, so who are not encouraging violence, or any of the things that they're accused of doing. They're thinking, they're commentating on their society, they're being critical of their society, and they're trying to understand what's going wrong. And they are if not hounded out, they're certainly hounded to the margins, right? They're marginalised, and they are kept away from the mainstream. And this is to the detriment of our societies, because we need critical voices, for goodness sake.
Oh, well, absolutely. And I mean, the news came out last week that something called the 77th Brigade, which sounds like a made-up name, but it's actually a real thing in apparently the British Army, which is presumably part of their intelligence division. And they were literally spying on people who disagreed with government policy during, well, they still will be spying on those of us who disagree with government policy in a vocal way, but particularly during the last couple of years with that particular problem that we had in our country regarding the so-called disease. And so they were literally enforcing government policy and ensuring that people were highlighted, people who simply would just, well, people like Mark Stein, for example, and others would be taken down. But it really is kind of crazy, and but it just needs to be made clear. And UK Column makes a great job of exposing those sorts of things.
So the 77th Brigade, or as I like to call them, the gallant 77th Brigade, because we like to call them the gallant 77th Brigade, because of course they're just all keyboard warriors and there's nothing gallant about them.
Yes.
So
the gallant 77th Brigade, that should be a poem that somebody should write. William McGonagall, perhaps.
Yeah. So the gallant 77th have a standing force of...
Crying out loud. 2,500.
It gets worse, right? Because General Sir Nick Carter was boasting about this, that they could surge resources into the 77th. And if they wanted to, you know, in times of crisis, they could provide an extra 20,000 keyboard warriors into the 77th Brigade to beef up our defence against misinformation. So they were talking about over 20,000 people. Now, whether they ever had that, who knows? But that's what the claim was being made by General Sir Nick Carter. Now, General Sir Nick Carter had a whole philosophy, and this philosophy permeates the West. It permeates the Pentagon, it permeates the Ministry of Defence, it permeates RUSI and all the associated think tanks and alphabet soup of NGOs and what have you surrounding defence. They all have this same philosophy. A philosophy that doesn't seem to be related to reality particularly closely. And I'll try and explain. I'll try and keep this brief because it's a bit of a strange subject. But the idea is that just like there's no binary between men and women, it's a spectrum, right? You've got really butch guys and you've got really girly girls, and you could be anywhere in the middle. They're maintaining that there's no binary between peace and war. You're always a little bit at war. You're just at war below the level when you're actually shooting people in the head.
Yeah.
Right? But you're always at war. So, and everything is part of your warfare. So your media organisations, your national broadcaster, your education institutes, your economy, your everything. Everything about your society is part of the weapons of this warfare. And it's below the level of actually war, killing people, but it's happening all of the time. And part of this is the information war, part of this is what you are doing to persuade the population of the opposing nation that their leaders are wrong and you're right, that they need to change the leaders, that they need to have regime change, or whatever the agenda happens to be. So a big part of the ASOM of the war of the future was not so much to bomb other countries, but kind of trip them up a little bit and tie their shoelaces and all of this sort of stuff. All done through influence peddling, including the 77th Brigade. And this was a major part of the strategy. And old-fashioned war of the sort that the Russians are currently engaged in was viewed as being passé. This was a thing of the past. We weren't
Yes.
going to have that, so we could run down the RAF, we could run down the army, we have some aircraft carriers, but not maybe any idea what to do with them. We could run down the navy in terms of, we no longer sat down and looked at threat analysis, appropriate response. There was no reasoning to it. It was ephemeral. It was an unreal situation. If you compare it to take when the Committee for Imperial Defence was set up, late 1900s, they sat down and looked exactly what are the threats we're facing. Well, there's the French. Okay, there's the French. They could come across the channel. What else have we got? Well, the Russian Empire, right? They are building railways towards Afghanistan, and they've got ambitions in India, right? Okay, so they sat down and they said, right, if the Russians attack India, the British Indian Army won't be able to hold them on its own. They'll need to be reinforced and hold them. So we need to have a force in Britain that we could dispatch quickly enough to address that situation. And the worst possible scenario is that the French would take the opportunity to cross the channel and invade. Therefore, we need to leave enough troops in Britain to defend against that. So that defined the size of the army. The Navy was defined basically on maritime strategy and sea power worldwide, so we have enough of a Navy to rule the waves.
Yes.
And that was it. So it was entirely rational. What are the threats? What could attack us? What do we need to defend against that? You read that and it makes sense. You come to now, and you've got General Stinnett Carter talking about hybrid warfare and everything's war, and there's no such thing as peace, and it's no longer a binary. We don't have peaceful relationships with other countries. We have somewhere between active war and peace, somewhere in the middle. It's a grey area.
Okay.
And this is the ideology that permeates the West. Now, the 77th Brigade are a big part of this, and of course, you've got Tobias Ellwood, right? Now, Tobias Ellwood, Conservative Party politician, member of Parliament, Bournemouth East. He has chaired the Defence Select Committee. He's a government minister, former Ministry of Defence, and he is a lieutenant colonel in the 77th Brigade.
Yes. I heard that. I found that shocking. That this guy Tobias Ellwood, Conservative MP, is actually he's an army officer. Intelligence army officer.
So he's in the 77th Brigade, and what did he do? He goes on BBC and he does an interview, and he says, basically, I paraphrase but only slightly, we're already having a proxy war with Russia. We should embrace this, right? We're fighting a proxy war. Let's not deny it. Let's get stuck in. Let's get wellied in. Now, what we need to do is we need more munitions. So we should build an enormous artillery shell manufacturing facility in eastern Poland so that we can ship shells across the border into Ukraine and fire at the Russians. That's what he said.
Crikey.
On air. Now, if you're Russian and you're listening to this is just a sliver away from a declaration of war. At the very least, you're thinking, well, if we build that factory, we're going to bomb it, and that means they're going to launch raids into NATO territory, so that's an escalation. So the whole thing's escalating. So here's this 77th Brigade, which is all about hybrid warfare and influence people and influence peddling and strange ephemeral ideas that don't actually equate to troops on the ground and things that you can understand. Generating on the BBC a narrative that will promote Russian counter-strike or Russian anticipatory strikes against Britain and against the West. He is going on and via his propaganda is beating the drums for World War III. Now, can you explain how that is in any way to the advantage of Great Britain?
Well, no, I can't explain that. But of course, he's also ensuring through the 77th Brigade that point of view dominates. And anybody who doesn't agree with that point of view is going to be shadow banned on the internet, or is going, in fact, to be suspended or banned off their platforms, which is what we've been seeing in the past couple of years.
Well, there's the banning and the whole no platforming agenda, yeah. But there was a point where senior government officials, senior military men, that they could be wrong, right? They could make mistakes. They could have, they most certainly did make mistakes. But they were at least agreed that the object of the exercise was the interest, the safety, the security, the defence of the realm. That what they were in was the defence of the realm business.
Yeah.
Right? And they weren't in the aggressive foreign wars business. Right? Despite the British Empire running 1/3 of the planet at one point, there was surprisingly little in terms of aggressive foreign wars. It was a tiny army. It wasn't built on conquest. It was built on commerce principles.
Yes.
And so you had a situation where, for the most part, it was avoid major entanglements with other major powers, particularly European and Russian ones, and try and keep everything reasonably stable, and be in a position where, if things go horribly badly wrong, we can survive it, which they did during the time of Napoleon, for example, right? Even when the whole of the continent was basically barricaded against Britain, and we were at one point on our own. And the view was, well, okay, we've got the Navy, and on our own it is. So there was always an understanding that we've got this special part of the world called Britain. It's an island and it's defensible because it's an island. And it started from that, and they then said, well, you've got to dominate the Channel and dominate the North Sea, because that's where the trouble comes from, and so they did that. And then we've got links and trade, so it protected that. There was a rationale to it, but it was based on defending our people. It wasn't based on conspiring to start World War III.
Well, yes, indeed, and based on globalism, really, on internationalism, on trying to enforce a worldwide order of so-called democratic values, quote unquote, that really are whatever you want them to be at that particular time. And there is that sense in which Britain almost feels like we've been pulled into somebody else's service in order to enforce this globalist agenda, which we see playing out day to day. But without wanting to go into that any further, I see it's coming up for the top of the hour. So this has gone very quickly, actually, that half hour with you, David. I just want to say thank you. For more on this sort of geostrategic, geopolitical analysis, I do urge viewers to check out ukcolumn.org and their Facebook page, which is simply facebook.com/UK column, as is their twitter.com/UK column. And you've got a huge number of supporters. I was down in the Borders one day, and this truck passed me, and emblazoned on the side of it was the words ukcolumn.org on both sides of this truck. And I said to the guy I was with, who on earth is that driving that? And he goes, oh, that's a bloke that lives out in the outside the village, and he's into all of that kind of stuff, and he's literally driving about a truck that's got ukcolumn.org emblazoned on both sides of it. And so it looks like an army truck as well. So I don't know where he's got it, and I don't know who he is at all, but I mean, you just see it in the most unlikely places. So congratulations for everything that you guys and girls are doing over there, David.
We've got a very loyal viewership. When we were thrown off of YouTube and such like, it was actually the making of us, because we had to say to the audience, you need to commit, you need to support us, and they did. Hugely, and this made all the difference. So we've got resources that are allowing us to grow, and it's all based on the website. So the starting points come to ukcolumn.org, and there's heaps of content. There's a lot of written content. There's a lot of video and audio and content going up there all the time.
Yes.
We're able to do, and you were able to come along to this. We had an event just recently in Motherwell, in the Glow Centre in Motherwell, where a lot of our audience was able to get together, and we were able to have a chat with them, and it was a lovely evening. And we've had several of these, and planning another one for sometime in June. So we are running live events as well, and this allows the community to develop. There's a community that's built around it.
Absolutely, and we haven't had time to get into that, but I just want to say I did go along to the audience of your, shall we call it, a UK column meetup in Motherwell, of all places, and I'm known for counting numbers precisely, and I counted just over 120 people at this ukcolumn.org meetup in Motherwell. So if you can get those sort of numbers in Motherwell, goodness me, you must have a lot of support that's out there, and you're going to be creating a lot of work, I'm afraid, for the 77th Brigade to find all of these 120 people. But on that positive note, David, I want to just say thank you very much, and we must have you back on again, or any of the other folk from the UK column would always be good to see. So I'm going to say goodnight to you just now, and hope to see you again.
It's been lovely talking to you, and until next time, bye for now.
Thank you, David. All the best. Great stuff, David Scott from the UK column. And folks, the shop is always there, and our wee book for the Union is a must. So please do partake of this. Every home in the country should have one. If you want to annoy the 77th Brigade, please do get a copy of a wee book for the Union. And please do sign up to us at forceforgood.uk/sign-up, and you'll get our email every fortnight. Now, for those who are watching on TikTok, you wouldn't have seen the interview, of course, as I mentioned at the start of the programme, because the interview is only really here on Facebook and on YouTube and on Twitter. So while it looked like I was sitting doing nothing, I was in fact listening to the person who was on the other screens. And Tom says, God save the King. Totally agree with that. Talking about God save the King, the new stamps have been revealed today, which will have King Charles's face on them, and that's what they're going to look like. That's what the stamp will look like, and they're going to be available on the 4th of April ongoing. Ian Laurie says, what's your thoughts on Boris chucking Northern Ireland under the bus? Well, of course, as British Unionists, we find that appalling. And Northern Ireland says, check out the new mural of the royal family. It's outstanding. We do have a photograph of that, and I'm going to actually see if I can bring that one up for the benefit of our viewers on TikTok and Twitter and on YouTube. And let me just bring it here. There it goes. His Majesty King Charles III. It's a good one. It's a good one. We'll put that out on our Facebook page. Okay, so folks, it just remains for me to say thanks for all the comments that you've sent in. Thanks for all the viewers, especially a big thanks to David Scott of ukcolumn.org for being our guest this evening. We will be back next week at 7 o'clock across all our digital platforms throughout the United Kingdom and across the world. We'll be bringing you quality pro-UK comment. So it just remains for me to say, God bless the United Kingdom and God save the King. See you next week.